Okay, so here we go. Took the clay out. You can see it lined up real nice. Part of it is hoping that you get the clay set up to where you want it, where you think it's positioned correctly, and then you have to take it off of the clay and put the glue in between the two parts, put it on both sides of it, and then line it back up. The problem is you can't see exactly how it's going to line up because the glue is globbed on there. You want to have, put generous amount on either side of where you're gluing. So when you line it up, it's hard to tell exactly where it lines up. So you're hoping that your clay didn't move too much and it kind of fits right back into the clay support. And then after you put it into the clay support, you build up the clay support a little bit more and hope that it doesn't shift while it cures for 24 hours. It could shift a little because in 24 hours the clay will dry. One other thing I didn't mention, the cracks in the legs with the stainless steel rods going through them. I fire the rods in the clay at the same time, and the steel doesn't shrink with the heat, but the clay does. So if I was to, do it again and have planned to put the rods in there, I could have wrapped paper around the rods and taped the paper on before I build the clay around it. So when it shrinks, it has space to shrink around the rod. The paper creates a barrier of space to so it doesn't crack. So the space is needed for the shrinkage of the clay. Clay shrinks 10 to 13% depending on how high you fire it. The higher you fire it, the more it shrinks. But you can see that it looks real good. It's lined up pretty perfectly in the back, especially the back of the piece. It's not going to line up any better than that, so I'm happy with it. The front is a little bit off. You can see, the front of it, it's a little bit behind on top compared to the bottom. But the trick with that is now with the Carbondo, I have to build that area up until I can make that smooth transforming area that will hide the line. So you build up on top here, up here, a little bit extra, and then when you grind it, you're going to match it to that. You don't want to have any divot. I learned this through gluing a lot, but also through building bronze sculptures and putting bronze sculptures together where that's what you're doing. You're bending the bronze metal, you cast separate parts, you bend the bronze metal to fit together as best as you can, but there's always going to be divots where you weld. So in those divots you fill in with weld, and then you grind it on either side of here and here, here and here, until it blends perfectly. So it's the same kind of process with building bronze sculptures and building, these clay sculptures. When you meet two parts together, there's always going to be, it's never going to be perfect. When you fire two parts separate, they're never going to shrink exactly the same way they did when you first built it. After you cut it, you fire it, they're going to shrink a little different. There's going to be a little bit of funkiness, and you just line it up the best you can, and then you fill in the gaps and you grind it down. And after I'm done with it, you won't even be able to tell that it was two parts. It will just look like one universal piece. Like an example of that is, try to make my way over here. My studio is very messy. I go through periods of extreme mess to cleaning it up, reasonably well. I think that most prolific artists, they have very messy studios at times. I think it's part of the process. And I see it as kind of a tornado tornado of work, a whirlwind of work happening, and you don't want to stop that flow, that process, and you just, you know, a lot of artists I've worked for, that's what happens. Their studio gets very messy. They clean it up at times, especially when people are coming to look at work. But here is a sculpture where this was you know, this is, it's kind of hard to see, but it's a 3-part sculpture. So you can't tell where it was put together. I can because I did it, but there's certain sections where it was mended, and the point is that you can no longer tell where that is. So like here's one section is right here. This is all mended together. Another section is, where's another section? It's so hard for me even to find. Right here. So another section is right there. This is all mended. And, you know, like I said, after I'm done with it, you can't even tell. You fill it in, you grind it down, you get the right texture flow, you get the color flow, and you put the gloss varnish on it, and it's pretty much undetectable. This was, you know, this is about a 5-foot sculpture, so it had to be fired in 3 different parts to fit in my kiln, and then put together. This is about a man ascending into heaven through the spirit, kind of inspired by a Bible story about a man going to heaven in a whirlwind of fire. So, yep, I will keep you posted on my progress with this current piece, the Wolf and Hawk, and I'll get back to you when I take further steps.